Wow, I've really been doing this seasonal YouTube thing for, let me just check my notes here, 6 years, huh? And people actually listen to these videos? I'm joking, of course. That's just some of my unenforceable trademarked in-name only quote-unquote humor. But a new season means I made the same mistake I do every few months and decided to watch anime. Again, you know, it's not too late. We could still turn back and make this into a body pillow review channel. Still watching? Fine. Let's just get into how I picked my shows with my usual method then. Of course, by releasing a bunch of cats named after shows into the streets of Springfield, Ohio, and whichever made it out on the other side were my winners. Joke's on me. Turns out racist fear-mongering isn't an accurate representation of reality, and I'm now housing 50-some animals, because I couldn't just return them to the shelters after getting attached. I'm not a monster, so I just picked some goddamn shows with my Patreon supporters. Sue me. Anyway, let's run through the roster before breaking down my thoughts on the first episodes. Loner Life in Another World strips the edge from the class transported to another world trope, where the outcast isn't damn near murdered. And talk about a blast from my channel's past. Demon Lord Retry actually got a second season, with all the impact of a half-hearted shrug. Reincarnated Aristocrat is back for its second go-around, so let's see if it can actually make it out of the prologue phase this time, huh? The highly anticipated adaptation of horror legend Junji Ito's Uzumaki promises to stroke my love for twisted visuals. Channeling the millennial and Gen Z mindset in the workforce, let this grieving soul retire as a guy who's just sick of adventuring. Are you tired of the villainous genre yet? Because your chances of escaping it are about as bad as mine, with I'll become a villainess who goes down in history. Nothing quite says rom-com like giving up on your dreams and being pushed into a harem, with tying the knot with the Amagami sister. ReZero is back once again for a third season to torture our feels. 365 days until the wedding prays nothing will go wrong by lying to your coworkers about a wedding with someone you barely know. What do badminton and basketball have in common? Hopefully Blue Box has the answer, because I sure as hell don't. Dan Da Dan gives us the hilarious antics of dead people and existential cosmic dread. JC Staff brings us the stories of girls who couldn't become magicians, where a group of girls picks up the pieces of their lives after failure. Bleach's third of 4 split cores rebounds to really kick the end of the series into gear. The OG rom-com is back to school these youngins on how it's done, with the new adaptation of Ranma 1/2. How I Attended an All-Guys Mixer awakens something in us all. You Are Miss Servant is another in a long line of assassins trying to be normal. Really getting sick of these banished from the hero party anime, but the healer who was banished from his party is in fact the strongest, couldn't even manage a shred of originality. Congratulations viewer, you're an accomplished just by watching this video with If My Wife Becomes an Elementary School Student. Oh, Spirit Chronicles gets a second season? My only question is why, but I guess I'm watching it out of obligation then. A terrified teacher at Ghoul School is exactly what's on the tin, but hilarious antics ensue. Mao 2099 explores something actually interesting by sticking a demon lord in the far-flung cyberpunk future. And lastly, Shangri-La Frontier is back for its second season. Well, we're certainly looking at a crazy mix, so let's go ahead and dig into the first episodes of these shows. First up is Loner Life in Another World, where a sarcastic guy and his class get transported to another world. Surprise. Adventuring sounds sorta dumb, but he can totally get behind some OP abilities. Unfortunately for him, he's the last one in line and gets some random powers that are left over. So, can our introvert keep his crazy class together in a fantasy world? Well, hot off the heels of Failure Frame and Aristocrat also airing this season, it's nice to see a comedic take on this premise as opposed to some edgy revenge plot. The first episode does pack some meta sort of humor, with our main dude actually reading Aristocrat and then being excited for all of half a second about that Isekai warping magic circle thing showing up in his classroom, until he realizes it'd probably be a pain. Well, I like him already for trying to bail on this plot before the bullshit even kicks off. The gag, if you even want to call it that, is our dude got all the seemingly stupid leftover items his class didn't take, and as it turns out, they're all pretty good abilities with horribly inaccurate names. So while this might seem like a parody or satire, it more just winks at the audience, as it follows a fairly normal isekai setup. Does okay, but didn't really grab me in the first episode. This anime has a sort of throwback vibe. Holy shit, I say that, and really, it just looks like it's trying to capture the mid to late 2000s aesthetic with its character designs. I feel like that's more of a self-report than anything, but the animation isn't much to write home about. It's very plain. Nothing really stands out, which is fine as it looks invisible, but it is worrying that this is what they're putting forward as their first impression. That leaves